Welcome to Gatorade, an OpinionRoute show to help market research professionals learn and grow. In this podcast, we share stories, insights, and philosophies that unlock enterprise value for the modern market research company. Here's our host, CEO and founder, Terence McCarron.
For this upcoming episode of the podcast, I sat down with Kayla Cousineau, and Kayla is our COO here at OpinionRoute. And if you haven't heard about Kayla's background a little bit, this is your chance. She spent 15 years in healthcare operations before coming into the market research industry with OpinionRoute. And in the conversation, we're going to navigate everything about her transition into the industry, this situation of technology adoption that I think the industry overall is finding itself in. And then a big topic is change management. So how do we lead really engaged, successful teams out of their comfort zone and into a new phase of growth? Hope you enjoy it. Here's Kayla. Kayla, welcome. You are the very first guest on the Opinion Route podcast here. So why don't you introduce yourself? What do you do here? Tell us about your background and how you got into the market research industry.
So I spent the last 15 years in healthcare. I got my master's in healthcare administration, which is just the fancy way of saying an MBA in healthcare. And through my latest job in healthcare before I left was out of Pittsburgh. And I'm a Cleveland girl who was just working out of her house before COVID and before it was a real thing. And I started to just kind of have the itch for change. I missed the human connections that I wasn't getting on a regular basis because I'd go to Pittsburgh once a week-ish, of course not with COVID, but the thing about being a non-clinical person in a clinical setting is it's great, it's dynamic, it's completely complex and complicated, but you also have more limitations when it comes to impacting change. And knowing you outside of work, sharing stories about businesses, I started to feel that itch more and more, like about being able to change and be able to lead through influence of change. So after one lunch with you, I'm learning about what the heck do you guys do? What is OpinionRoute? Being this company downtown, not far away, I could feel the passion that you had around the difference and the company was making, your founding story, and then the 10 years of growth that it's experienced, which is a great track record. And that got me excited about this, like, if you asked me 5 years ago, I would have never pictured myself out of healthcare, but then it started to get the wheels churning, right? And so then I got more and more excited about just the idea of getting into a new field and going into the office on a regular basis. Maybe not 5 days a week, but having 4 kids at home, the hybrid schedule is everything. And then the ability just to kind of lead and attract talent into a new industry that I had to learn, obviously, but really about driving change and making an impact on the day to day more than we could. Of course, we did in healthcare, but not in a way a doctor can, obviously, or a nurse. So sort of my background.
Yeah, must have been a big decision, really, spending the whole period of your career in healthcare and then picking an industry you probably never heard of before now, right? That must have been a big decision. So now you're 2 years into it. How are you liking the industry?
I love it. I'm still learning a lot, which is awesome, which is fun to me. Not everyone values that, but I do. It definitely has less acronyms than healthcare, believe it or not. There's a lot here, but it's less. And I find it really interesting because there is such complexities in, like, I'll call it the supply chain, from the big companies that need the market research companies that need these sample providers that do the research, build the story, and take it back to the companies. My exposure to market research was one class at Xavier as an undergrad. And it was okay. I knew I didn't want to actually do the research myself, but I do. I still like it. I find it fascinating that this is an industry similar to healthcare that has so much data. It's built off insights. I like learning about new companies that all have the word insight, data, or research somewhere in it, right? But as I learn more, it also floors me how little data sometimes gets used, sometimes in the running of business. So I'll give you an example. You taught me how to change my IP address. It's actually really not that hard, right? And then I find out, like, okay, that's really easy. It's a click of a button on my cell phone, no big deal. But then sometimes we find that some research base the definition of a duplicate just off the IP address, right? Which is exciting because the opportunity to educate and influence and help people get the real quality data is what we're all about. And that to me is like, we have a problem we can go help people solve. And that's what I think I love about it. And every day it is tech. It's problems we can solve. right? This isn't a patient with cancer that I really have no impact on. This is hey, some fraud got into a survey and we're going to course correct and write for our client, right? And I love that. I like solving the problem. So yeah, so far, so good. Still liking
Yeah.
it.
Good. We're glad you're enjoying it. It's interesting. I think about when we brought you on, and this has happened at a couple of points in our growth trajectory where you have to shed part of your old skin to grow and become something bigger, better, more efficient. And I think when we found you and enticed you to come join, that's really where we were. We were at an intersection point where we knew we had to get ready for the next growth phase. We were becoming more diversified in what we could do with our market research, sort of customer base. So for me, it was weird experience because I have 25 years industry experience, but I knew that you were able to do things I couldn't do within the business. So when you joined, my perspective was, I don't want to get in the way and over influence or over direct Kayla's crafting of our tomorrow. That was kind of how I looked at it. I'd love to hear from your perspective. So you come in, you jump into things, you have to learn a lot, right? Our acronyms, the lay of the land of the industry, what we're doing, who does what's working, not working. I'd love to just hear from your memory what that experience was like for you.
It was filled with a lot of questions, as you know, because you took a lot of them yourself. But it was really fun to first, of course, like getting to know the team and the players, and both internally, right, within OpinionRoute, but then also who does what and where do I go find this? I thought I kind of had my handle around technology, and then I came here and I was like, oh wow, I have a lot to learn, which was great. But then it was also then externally, like learning the landscape of the industry too. At the same time, right, I still have a lot more to learn in that area, obviously. But between who's our big competitors in this space and who's a partner and a vendor and a client and all that kind of the who's and who does what was really what I wanted to tackle first, to kind of start to frame my understanding, building market research org structure in my head almost, because I'm a little visual and I kind of love pictures. And then to start to once I got to know people, start asking questions, then we start getting to processes, right? Which is like where all the fun is. And then I started to learn where the workflows are. And then as I'm learning, a project goes awry, right? Someone's upset about this, something really awesome happened and we really delivered for a client. And then I started to see where the deviations from a said workflow, whatever. And then talking to the team, starting to understand where those opportunities were to start sitting down and tackling the low-hanging fruit on the operational needs that we were going to need to elevate us eventually. So yeah, that's kind of how I started it. I think that was probably my first 3 months of just sitting a lot of meetings and asking a lot of questions. Why do we do this that way? Where is that? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think if memory serves me right, you started writing a lot. Tell me about that documentation process for you.
Yeah. First it came in, and this is not like unique to OpinionRoute or market research. You have everyone in any company can relate to this, right? You ask somebody how we do something, and then you ask the next person how you do something and what is the right way. And then everyone's answer is just a little bit different, right? Not egregiously different, but a little bit different, right? So I think getting alignment on how we do things and what is the way to do things, right? And can we all say that the same way, right? There's probably 1,000 examples today. We have some deviations, right? So really it's an engagement thing. I mean, people is so important to me, the team being part of that. So the process of defining a process, getting everybody in the room and letting them debate what doesn't work, what does work, that kind of thing, and then writing it down. And a lot of times, and I've learned this in previous lives, but it works here too, is I'll just take a first step and I know it'll be totally wrong. And I can't wait for the reactions. But we have to start with something like a react versus create, right? It's just a much more productive use of people's times and the thing we love to call meetings. But if we don't have that, I'm so big on it with my team, even now, that how do you manage the performance of a person if you don't have it documented, right? If you don't have a workflow, how do you train a new person? How do you keep your top performers engaged? Nobody wants to stick around with a manager who, one, tolerates low performers and has a huge appetite for inconsistencies. And it's, oh, by the way, it's hard to find any reference to anything. Like, it just doesn't set up people for success. I want people to know what's expected of them. It's one of those big cornerstones of engagement, employee satisfaction, any kind of study you look at. Having all of that defined and standardized and then documented and easy to access, right? We had to enhance that. And I couldn't do that without the whole team's involvement. Like, that was not something. Yeah, my 5-step PowerPoint workflow that's like literally 5 squares was totally wrong. But guess what? At the end of the day, we all came out with the same understanding and documentation of what that process was, whatever it was, right? We joke all the time. I just literally said it this morning, but anytime a mistake is made or somebody misses a step in the process, I always say like, okay, where does this live in Notion? Show me where this is, right? Notion being our home of our like website company, home of all of our information. And sometimes I get a roll of the eyes or a laughter. And sometimes I get 3 different Notion pages and I'm like, okay, there's an opportunity. Like to me, it's just an opportunity. It's just education and it's, back to the consolidation, consistency kind of thing. So yeah, documentation is very important. Otherwise, how do we point people as to where to go? We are always improving it too, which I love when we have new people come in and at 90 days, not even, sometimes I do it sooner. I say, how could we have done that better? How could we have trained you better? What resources didn't you have? Like how hard was it to find certain information? Because these are complex projects. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of metrics. So that's why I'm so big on that, because otherwise we can't be a strong team without anything, without that consistency.
So when you came in, and even still now, we have an account-based operation structure. So we have what we call pods, which are really teams of people around sets of accounts. So as you start unifying and rallying the troops to document the right way to do things, I have to imagine you had discrepancies where people were dug in on a step. No, this is the right way to do something. No. This is the right way to do something. So I'm just curious, from your years of experience, what kind of principles you sort of approach those disagreements with so that people still feel like they were heard, listened to, acknowledged for their experience, but ultimately the right thing happens for the company overall.
Yeah. Well, we got to put it all on the table first. We got to have the powwow, whatever that looks like. We got to get everybody in the room and say like, Kayla, I don't agree with these 5 steps. Actually, step 2 should be this. And then their colleague says, no, it should really, I do this, right? It's one of those, like, again, going back to the team engagement. It's not for me to decide. The fun is in that discussion. I love the discrepancies. I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's have some fun. Let's tackle it. All right, why do you do it that way? Tell me what an advantage is. What's a pro or con? And sometimes you don't even have to ask all that. It just comes out naturally in team members. Okay, now let's hear from the other person. Why do you do that? I don't mind like a little bit of like a fun, a healthy conflict like that, like a discussion, because honestly, in my experiences, that's sometimes the best, those are the most productive meetings a lot of times, not always. So hashing it out most of the time will end in somebody learning something that they maybe didn't know before. That's a win, right? Coming out of there with the standardization that we all agree on something. Maybe it's not quite what somebody wanted, but it's the right way to do it. We're not coming out of that room until we all agree with that. And that, if you don't have the team engaged in that process, they're never going to buy into whatever the workflow is or whatever the new initiative is or SOP, whatever you want to call it, right? And that time and effort, that debate, that discussion, it has sticking power, like for sure. I love those discussions. I love those conversations. I also look at, what kind of questions come up the most, and not just in a given team, let's say, but it's also like outside of the team. We have questions from some colleagues. They are always asking about X, right? All right, well, that feels like there's some education there. We haven't really done our job so they can understand that. We sit down and teach them so they don't have to ask us next time and delay a step. And I think the other thing is just like I mentioned before, but that react versus create. We got to make these productive sessions. These projects are running nonstop, 24/7.
Yeah.
They have quick turnarounds. Unlike healthcare, they have end dates. So how do we do this quickly and utilize very scrutinized around meeting time, and time away from a project, time away from emails is important. So let's throw up the quick, spaghetti on the wall kind of thing. Let's beat it up, hash it out. And it's okay if it takes a few versions. A little bit of this is patience too, right? And then we all come out aligned.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's engagement with the team. There's a deep willingness to be able to ask questions and listen with open ears to the answers. And then the thing I love about what you said the most was the taking the sting out of the healthy conflict or the disagreement. We can put that all on the table and work through it and come to a mutual agreement on how to move forward best. Is that kind of a fair summary? So to me, this feels like almost a recipe, and tell me if I'm missing something, but it feels like a perfect recipe for getting out in front of change management, which is a huge topic, not just in market research, but across all industries. Things are moving so fast, economically, technologically. Efficiency is sort of the ruthless goal across sectors right now. So change management, I think, is hyper in focus right now. So am I right on that? You're more thinking of a proactive team engagement approach to get ahead of change management, but then what happens if you do face resistance after that had been agreement, you were thought there had been agreement? How do you then take that next step to
Mhm.
kind of work past that to move toward the better way, if you will?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing with that is it comes down to the consistency. If I know what's expected of me, like pick on my project manager team, right? Like I'm accountable for these 5 competencies, right? My performance review, my one-on-ones, all the things come back to these 5 competencies, let's say. It's all about how we manage up to that, right? So developed our workflows, we've educate and educate and educate. Like what is it? The rule of 7, you can't expect people to retain information unless they've heard it 7 times, right? So I literally have a list of like 12 topics that are really important for my team, and we rotate them through on a standing agenda to say like, okay, you know what, we haven't talked about how we do this in a while. Let's just do a quick refresh, right? Little pulse training opportunities. Obviously, having the support of a leadership team who supports change as you drive from the top and through our executive team and down, right, it is key to that because we have to lead by example. Otherwise, we can't expect them to come along with us, right? And then it comes down to fit, right? The team members, do you have the right people on the right bus and are they in the right seat? And not being afraid of having those conversations of this is a fit or this isn't a fit or let's evolve the role. You know, the fun part about, and the other thing I haven't mentioned, being at a small company is that flexibility we have, and we all wear a lot of hats, and you know, some of us thrive in those environments and some don't, and that's okay too. But just being honest with people, because if they're not happy in their role, we can't expect them to be productive. And if they have aspirations to move into a different team, like we've had other people do here, right? Like I'm really interested in learning more about product and how we develop our navigator system. Great, let's get you some of that exposure. I love the ability to understand where people's growth are. We just finished all my reviews from last year with the team and understanding, just tell me where you want exposure. You might not even know if you like product, right? But like you don't know unless you try. So let's just give you that opportunity without fully putting you in the role and expose people and kind of set them up. So yeah, I think it is very important to be consistent with the team, you know, holding people accountable and then making sure you have the right folks. It is a real fit for them in the job that they're sitting in.
Yeah, I think the one thing we've done well over the last couple of years is try and take this thing out of the fear of failure, right? If people are always afraid that it's not going to go right the first time, there's going to be resistance to trying something new, which is at the crux of change. So, you know, kudos to you. I think you've been a huge driver of that throughout the whole company, and I think it served us really well. If you were to synthesize this, you're talking to leaders of market research companies who are trying to grow and structure and get more efficient and treat their talent better. What are a few tips you would give them in terms of how to successfully guide their teams through periods of change that the company needs?
That's a good question. Tips. So I would say first, you have to have the trust within your team. A little bit of a theme here, but I'm all about my people. If you don't have the trust in the team, you're dead in the water. Just stop right there, right? And that comes down to your ability to build the relationships with them, right? And then, you know, back to holding them accountable and not being afraid of conflict, because again, you can't tolerating low performers sends a bigger message to the organization than I think we a lot of times even value as leaders. Keeping it simple. These projects can be complex because we value quality so much. We look at a lot of metrics at any given time. We value a blend of partners. So it's not just you have 10 projects, but you have 10 projects that might have 3, 4, 5 partners that you're managing at once, right? There's a lot of hats that, like, I'll just pick on my project managers that they're wearing, right? How do we keep it simple, have some fun in the day? It's just work. At the end of the day, we got to go home to our families, and that's what matters most. And then I think just reminding people what matters. That I joke too with the team that when they roll their eyes at me because they've heard something come out of my mouth so much, I'm like, yes, it's a win. Like that means it's sticking in their heads, right? Versus well, I wasn't aware. The worst part as a leader, I think, is like when they say they didn't know something, I wasn't aware of that. Nobody told me, like that total failure, cringe moments as a leader for me. So say what matters and say it like 15 times until they roll their eyes at you, right? So yeah, I think that would be my top tips.
Nice. That's great. All right. So the $1,000,000 question, did everything you try work, right?
Should I ask you that question or you guys?
Yeah, well,
Or go ask my team. Are they all coming on to answer that?
yeah, exactly. And I think part of my question speaks to what you just mentioned a minute ago, but it's less about the subjective evaluation and more about how do you know things are working, right? What's the structure you use to identify what's going well and what's not and needs attention again?
Yes, I agree. Subjective's it's important, right? Like I could show the team all their numbers all day long, but if they were so stressed that last month, regardless of their numbers, like that matters. So there is that like having the pulse on the emotion side of the team, obviously is critical. But I think I am a huge proponent of getting feedback from my team. I ask them obnoxiously, frequently, what do they think? What do you like? What don't you like? You know, we started up kicking off new meeting series for the year, right? Hey guys, this is how we did it last year, but so what? Like, what do you want to see more of? How can we change these standing agenda items? Here's what I think we should do. Let's talk about it, right? So getting feedback consistently, at least what they've told me, the ones that, I mean, no one's comfortable giving feedback up the ladder, but I shouldn't say no one. Some people aren't, but that goes over very well. They do tell me, those that give me good feedback, were like, thanks for being so open to hearing this, you know, like, so I think that's a sign of a win for me. But then obviously there's, again, we're in market research, a lot of metrics, right? But we know when there's less errors on projects, less projects have to be escalated, right? That's how much revenue someone, like how much they can take on and not feel that stress, how many projects and revenue. So I look at both, right? All upside rewards for margin jobs that are bigger jobs, right? And the big kudos and recognizing people for job well done, obviously. And then, yeah, just making sure that, because my thought is, you know, we have aggressive growth goals. I'm really excited about it. But if we don't have this foundation underneath us when it comes to the documentation, consistency, all the things we've been talking about, right? We'll never be able to grow. We'll never be able to scale up. So it really does matter. And it takes time to make sure that you have you've kind of laid the groundwork, right? And then get out of their way. I love watching my team go and just deliver on the projects, right? And when a client sends a kudos and calls people by name, this is my favorite thing as a leader, because we've delivered for them. And not to mention it, like the teammate, how they make you feel, right? Like, even if it's one of those, like in healthcare, they say, you know, the surgery went bad, but the nurses were really nice. Your patient satisfaction was really high, but the surgery went bad. And it's the same thing in this, right? Like, is how we make them feel. This isn't just, we're not just a tool. We're not just a bot or an AI machine. We are humans on the other side, empathizing with the stress that our clients have, the deadlines that they're up against, and having that empathy and that connection, right? We call it H2H, human to human, is very powerful. And it's a big value prop that we have as a company that I love when I get to see my team excel in that. So those are some of the ways that we know it's working, right?
Yeah, all very values aligned for what we're trying to build for the long term here. It's exciting for me to hear you talk like this. I can see why the team loves marching toward the future growth that we're chasing, which is great. Well, we're coming up on the end here, Kayla, but I gotta finish with one big one for you. So what is your favorite part of your job?
It's the ability to come in and impact change and impact the work we do. Maybe I'll say it that way more. It's not just change. It's all the work we do, right? It's the ability to deliver on the client's needs, right? It's the ability to see my team grow both personally and professionally. I love that. I love when people are excited about a skill set they learned here that they'll have forever in their career, kind of thing. So I think it's really fun, not to mention coming into an office again. But it's fun to impact that. It's fun to see those impacts, to get things across that finish line. I think that's what I love the most.
Well, thank you. This has been fun.
This was fun. Thanks.
Thanks, Kayla.